Hi, I am Dr. Jacob Lauritzen, and this is Read, Write, and Cite, the show where I teach you how to read, write, and cite for your college classes. This video is part of a series on grammar, where we are talking about the structure of the English language and how things work together and build sentences and all that good stuff. Okay, in previous videos, I've explained a couple other kinds of sentences. We talked about simple sentences. We talked about compound sentences. We talked about complex sentences. In this video, we're going to talk about a combination. It is the fourth category for sentences, and it is a compound complex sentence. So, in this video, we're going to explain what this is. It's going to round out all the possible kinds of sentences. It's going to teach us all sorts of good things about structure and punctuation, and let's just get started. Okay, so here we go. What is a compound complex sentence? Well, it's a sentence that includes two or more independent clauses and at least one dependent clause. So, an independent clause, remember, it's a group of words that includes a subject, a verb, and a complete thought. It can be a sentence by itself. It can also be stacked up with other clauses or groups of words. And in this case, a compound complex sentence is going to have two independent clauses and at least one dependent clause, which is a group of words that can't be a sentence by itself, but that adds extra information to a sentence. Okay, so let's look at formula is going to look something like this. Independent clause, dependent clause, but it could also be dependent clause, independent clause, independent clause. It could be independent clause, dependent clause, independent. Anyway, you get what I'm talking about. It can go in a lot of different ways, but it's going to include all of these parts and pieces. So here's an example. The teacher started to lose his voice because he had been teaching all day. That happens. In fact, I've got a sore throat right now. Sorry if it doesn't sound very good. Okay, so let's break this apart for its parts and pieces. So this right here is just a compound sentence. We've got an independent clause. The teacher started to lose his voice. That's the first independent clause. Then our second independent clause is he had been teaching all day. So you put those together, it's a compound sentence. But if we're going to add an extra piece to it, we can turn this compound sentence into a compound complex sentence by adding a dependent clause. So here's an example. The teacher, exhausted and stressed out, started to lose his voice because he had been teaching all day. This just sounds like a sentence that has lots of good details. And if your teacher gives this to you and they're like, all right, break this down and punctuate this, and you're like, oh, this just is too much. There's too much going on. So I'm going to break it down for you. Okay? So in this case, we have two independent clauses and we have a dependent clause. But the dependent clause is in the middle of the first independent clause. So it looks like this. We have the teacher started to lose his voice. That's the first part of the sentence, right? But in the middle of that, we have the phrase exhausted and stressed out, which is extra. It can't be a sentence by itself, so it's stuck in the middle. Okay, so we have the subject being separated from the rest of the independent clause, which is the verb and the complete thought. Okay, so here is the dependent clause that's stuck in the middle. And then here is the second independent clause. He had been teaching all day. And it's connected with the conjunction because. So again, the teacher started to lose his voice. That's the first clause. Exhausted and stressed out. That's the dependent clause stuck in the middle. And because he had been teaching all day. We put all together, just sounds like a sentence, but this is how it's broken apart for its parts and pieces. Why is this important? It's important because understanding where clauses start and stop is probably going to tell you where commas need to go, right? So for our first independent clause, the teacher started to lose his voice. We have to put commas at the beginning of exhausted and stressed out to show that something has been inserted into the middle of that that clause, that group of words, if we don't have that punctuation, the sentence gets confusing. So that explains these first two commas. But because we also have two independent clauses, we need to separate them we have the word because, and we have another comma, which we see separated here at the very end. So that's why we have 3 commas and a conjunction right in the middle, this transition word because. All these work together and they all make sense. And it's not this arbitrary thing that your teacher has made up because they want to ruin your life and make things difficult for you. Everything has a rule that makes sense. That's based on logic. And I hope this logic is coming across clearly to you. Obviously, we could look at any sentence and break this down. But I think with the culmination of this and the other videos, you could start to see why understanding all these different categories for sentences is going to help you to understand how to punctuate, how to avoid run-on sentences, which are basically compound sentences that aren't separated with commas, or to avoid comma splices, which are compound sentences or other kinds of sentences that just have commas but don't have conjunctions correctly connecting everything. Everything has a reason, everything has a purpose, and I hope after this series of videos that this makes sense for you. So again, let's review. A compound complex sentence, it's a sentence that includes 2 or more independent clauses and at least 1 dependent clause. But you can see that these could be combined in a lot of different ways to make an infinite combination of dependent and independent clauses that could be extremely complicated. But this is the category that explains that combination. Okay, so again, we have our example here that we looked at, and it is complicated, but when you break it down bit by bit, it makes sense. So I hope this video also made sense to you. If you have questions, feel free to ask me in the comments below, and I'll be glad to answer them. You can also reach out to me on social media at Carpe and Zen. That's my production company. I'll be glad to answer any of your questions. You can also check us out at our website, which is carpeandzen.com, carpeandzen.com. Again, I'm Dr. Jacob Lauritzen. This has been Read, Write, and Cite. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it was helpful. We'll see you in the next one. Bye.